June 8, 1942. A humid summer night presses down on the German front lines near the southern Bug River. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and gunpowder, a nervous stillness broken only by the distant rumble of artillery. A German sentry, young, jumpy, scans the starless sky. He's listening for the drone of engines, the telltale sign of a Soviet bomber. But all he hears is the chirping of crickets and the wind rustling through the tall grass. Then, a new sound. A soft, eerie whoosh slicing through the air. It's a sound he can't place, a whispering threat that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It reminds him of a broomstick sweeping through the night sky. Before he can shout a warning, the ground erupts. Two explosions, then a third, rip through a nearby supply depot, lighting up the night in a terrifying, momentary bloom of orange and black. Men dive for cover, firing blindly into the darkness. There's nothing to shoot at. No silhouette of a plane, no engine roar, just the haunting echo of that swooshing sound, already fading as chaos reigns below. Miles away, Lieutenant Yevdokia Dunya Bershanskaya, commander of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, allows herself a grim smile. Her girls have struck again. From the open cockpit of her Polikarpov Po-2 biplane, she watches the fires burn below. You can almost feel the freezing wind whipping at her face, the rough vibration of the plywood and canvas frame around her. Her aircraft is little more than a crop duster, a relic from the 1920s, with a top speed slower than the stall speed of a German Messerschmitt. It has no armor, no radio, and until 1944, no parachutes. It carries only two bombs, nestled under its flimsy lower wings. To the German soldiers below, these women were phantoms, ghosts in the night. They called them Nachthexen night witches. The name was meant as an insult, a way to belittle the unseen enemy that was robbing them of sleep and sanity. But the women of the 588th embraced it. They were witches, and this was their hunt. Their tactic was as simple as it was terrifyingly effective. Approaching their targets, they would climb, cut their engines to a near idle, and glide silently through the darkness. The only warning was that unsettling whistle of wind through the wing braces. They would release their bombs, restart their sputtering engines, and vanish back into the blackness before the anti-aircraft guns could even find their target. The psychological impact was devastating. For German soldiers, every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves could be a witch about to drop a surprise from the sky. Sleep became a luxury they could no longer afford. Tonight's mission was one of dozens, a relentless campaign of harassment designed to wear down the enemy, one small explosion at a time. Major Bershanskaya's regiment, composed entirely of women from pilots to mechanics, was an anomaly born of desperation. Formed in October 1941 by the famed aviator Marina Raskova, these volunteers, most in their late teens and early 20s, were eager to defend the motherland after the devastating Nazi invasion. They were given obsolete equipment, ill-fitting male uniforms, and the skepticism of their male counterparts. They were not expected to be a deciding factor in the war. They were simply expected to be a nuisance. But as the fires below attest, a nuisance can be a powerful weapon. For the young German sentry, trembling in his foxhole, the silence that followed the attack was now more terrifying than the noise of battle. Because he knew, with a cold certainty, that the witches would be back. That certainty, that gnawing dread, was precisely the point. It was a weapon forged not in a steel factory, but in the heart of a woman named Marina Raskova, a celebrated aviator, a Soviet Amelia Earhart. Raskova was a national hero long before the first German boot stepped onto Soviet soil. When the invasion began, Her office was flooded with thousands of letters from women across the Union, students, factory workers, clerks, all with one desperate plea: let us fight. They were not asking for nursing roles or administrative positions. They wanted to fly. They wanted to shoot. They wanted to kill the invaders who were burning their homes and killing their families. Initially, the official military doctrine was rigid. A woman's place was not in the cockpit. But as the Wehrmacht carved deeper into Soviet territory and the Red Army's losses mounted, desperation chipped away at tradition. Joseph Stalin himself, facing the potential collapse of his nation, finally gave Raskova the authority to form 3 all-female air regiments. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was one of them. The other 2, a fighter regiment and a dive bomber regiment, would eventually integrate men. Only the 588th would remain exclusively female from start to finish. They were an experiment, a propaganda piece, and a last resort, all rolled into one. The volunteers who answered the call were impossibly young. Girls, really. Nadezhda Popova, a flight school graduate with a rebellious spirit. Tatyana Makarova, a flight instructor from Moscow. Raisa Aronova, a student who had dreamed of the sky. They gathered at a small military aviation school in Ingles, a city on the Volga River. There, they were handed threadbare men's uniforms, boots too large for their feet, and the most basic, unforgiving aircraft imaginable, the Polikarpov Po-2. You could almost smell the pine and fabric of the plane, a machine so rudimentary that its navigational tools consisted of little more than a stopwatch and a map. Their training was brutal and compressed. What should have taken years was crammed into a few frantic months. They learned to fly, to navigate by starlight, to drop bombs by hand, all while enduring the biting Russian winter and the open disdain of many male officers who saw them as a joke, as Stalin's falcons in skirts. They learned to be not just pilots and navigators, but mechanics and armorers as well. Because their planes were so flimsy, they returned from missions riddled with bullet holes. It was the ground crews, also all women, who worked through the freezing nights, patching up the canvas wings with glue and fabric, sometimes using their own hairpins to fix engine parts, ensuring the sewing machines, as they nicknamed their planes, were ready to fly again by dusk. This shared struggle, this collective defiance, forged an unbreakable bond. They were more than a military unit. They were a sisterhood, bound by the roar of an underpowered engine and the shared terror of the night sky. They decorated their cockpits with flowers, drew cartoons on their fuselages, and danced to folk songs before missions. They fell in love, wrote poetry, and mourned their fallen with a quiet, fierce loyalty. They knew the odds. Flying a wooden biplane into a storm of German flak was a suicide mission. But every night, they climbed into their open cockpits, a pilot and a navigator, 2 young women against the might of the Third Reich. They had something to prove, and the darkness of the front was the only stage they needed. The mission begins not with a roar, but with a ritual. As twilight bleeds across the makeshift airfield, navigator Katya Ryabova and her pilot, Nadezhda Nadia Popova, perform their checks. You can almost feel the rough, cold texture of the canvas wings under their gloved hands, the biting chill that seeped through their ill-fitting uniforms. The air smells of frozen mud and high-octane fuel. They climb into their cockpits, Popova in the rear, Ryabova in the front, with nothing but a few feet of plywood and a shared, unspoken trust between them. There are no radios to call for help, no armor to stop a bullet, and until 1944, no parachutes to offer a final, slim chance of survival. Their only tools are a map, a compass, a stopwatch, and the faint glow of the instrument panel. The Shvetsov M11 engine sputters to life with a cough of black smoke. a sound more agricultural than martial. One by one, the sewing machines lift off into the deepening dark, each carrying just 2 bombs, one under each lower wing. A single mission was never enough. Because their payloads were so small, crews often flew 8, 10, even 18 sorties in a single night, a relentless cycle of bombing, returning, rearming, and taking off again. Popova herself once flew 18 missions in one night. Tonight's target is a German supply depot. The flight there is a tense, hypnotic journey through an ocean of black. Popova flies low, sometimes just feet above the trees, making their slow-moving biplane nearly invisible to German radar and night fighters. But the real danger isn't from above, it's from below. Suddenly, the darkness is shattered. Probing fingers of light erupt from the ground, sweeping across the sky in a desperate, frantic search. They've been spotted. This is what the Germans called a flak circus, a coordinated defense of searchlights and anti-aircraft guns designed to trap and annihilate them. Immediately, the sky becomes a lethal ballet. The women had developed a counter-tactic born of sheer audacity. They flew in threes. 2 planes would deliberately fly into the searchlights, acting as decoys. They would separate, twisting and diving, drawing the flak and chaos, while the third plane slipped through the darkness to the target. Then, they would switch roles until all 3 had dropped their payload. Tonight, it's Popova's turn to be the ghost. As her sisters draw the fire, she pushes her Po-2 towards the depot. Now comes the moment that terrified the Germans and defined the night witches. Popova cuts the engine. The sudden silence is deafening, broken only by the haunting whoosh of wind through the wing braces, the sound that gave them their name. In this terrifying, powerless glide, Ryabova leans over the side, her eyes fixed on the shadowy outlines of the buildings below, waiting for the perfect moment. "Now!" she screams over the wind. Popova pulls the release lever. The plane lurches upwards, lighter. Below, 2 explosions blossom in the dark. The engine roars back to life, the sound a defiant scream against the night. But their escape is not clean. A stray searchlight catches them, pinning their fragile aircraft in its blinding glare. For a second, they are a perfect silver target. The air around them explodes as flak tears through the sky. Popova feels the plane shudder violently. The controls go sluggish in her hands. She can hear the sickening sound of shrapnel ripping through the canvas of her wings and fuselage. They've been hit. The world becomes a storm of noise and light. The Po-2, caught in the searchlight's unforgiving grip, is a moth pinned to a board. Bright, colored bursts of flak, the Germans use different colors to help their gunners adjust their aim blossom around them in a deadly, psychedelic display. Popova throws the plane into a violent dive, a maneuver the rickety biplane was never designed to withstand. The wooden frame groans in protest, the bracing wires screaming. You can almost feel the stomach-lurching G-force, the desperate struggle as Popova fights the controls, wrestling the damaged aircraft back toward the safety of the darkness. Shrapnel has torn through the floor, the wings, and the fuselage. Popova's map is ripped from its holder and sucked out into the night. One bullet slices through the sleeve of her jacket, another whistles past Katya's head. Their only shield is the night itself, and Popova pushes the plane towards it with every ounce of her strength. She jinks left, then right, a frantic, unpredictable dance. Finally, she breaks free of the searchlight's grasp, plunging her battered plane back into the concealing blackness. For a moment, there is only the sputtering roar of the engine and the frantic beating of their own hearts. The flight back is a nightmare. The plane is sluggish, heavily damaged. Popova discovers her controls are barely responsive, and the compass is shattered. They are lost, wounded, and flying blind. Katya, calm under unimaginable pressure, peers over the side of her open cockpit, trying to find a landmark in the ink-black landscape below. Navigating by memory and starlight, every gust of wind threatens to tear their shredded wings apart. They are flying a ghost, a machine held together by little more than hope and the skill of its pilot. An hour, which feels like an eternity, passes. Then, Katya spots a faint familiar bend in a river. They are close. Landing is just as treacherous. With a damaged airframe and no lights to guide them, Popova has to feel her way down. The ground crew, hearing the ragged, uneven sound of their engine, knows something is wrong. They watch in tense silence as the silhouette of the Po-2 appears out of the darkness, wobbling dangerously. Popova coaxes the plane down, fighting it until the very last second. The landing is rough, a jarring series of bounces that sends mud flying, but they are down. They are alive. They don't speak as they climb out of the cockpit, their limbs trembling with adrenaline. The ground crew rushes to the plane, their faces a mixture of relief and horror. In the dim light of their handheld lanterns, the extent of the damage is revealed. The aircraft is a skeleton, a sieve. It is riddled with over 40 bullet holes. The fuel tank is punctured, the main spar is cracked, and Katya's navigator canopy is completely shot away. They count the holes in silent awe. How had they even stayed in the air? Later, Popova would discover a hole in her helmet. Looking at the mangled wreck that was once her plane, she simply says, "Katya, my love, we will live long." It wasn't a question. It was a promise, a defiant vow forged in the heart of the fire. Their plane would be patched up, and by the next night they would fly again. But for the other women of the 588th, the night was far from over, and not everyone would be so lucky. As the first cold gray light of dawn touches the horizon, the true cost of the night's work is counted. The sound of returning engines is a symphony of survival, each sputtering M11 a life returning from the brink. You can imagine the scene at the airfield. The ground crews, their faces smudged with grease and exhaustion, their eyes scanning the eastern sky. The pilots and navigators who have already landed huddled together, sharing cigarettes and hot tea, their gazes fixed on that same patch of sky, counting the silhouettes. One by one, the battered biplanes return, but sometimes the count stops short. A silence falls over the field, a heavy, knowing quiet that is more terrifying than any explosion. It's the silence of an engine that will never be heard again. The silence of an empty bunk. When a crew failed to return by the designated time, a grim protocol began. Commander Yevdokia Bershanskaya, a woman who carried the weight of every loss on her shoulders, would wait. She would stand there, a stoic figure against the rising sun, hoping against hope to hear one last, overdue engine. When the hope finally faded, the women would go to the tent or dugout of the missing crew. They would carefully, reverently, gather their personal belongings, a book of poetry, a photograph of a family they would never see again, a half-written letter home. Their things were packed and sent away. The beds were made. By nightfall, a new crew would take their place. There was no time for lengthy memorials. Their grief was a sharp, private thing, a wound they carried into the sky with them each night. Death was their constant co-pilot. Over the course of the war, the regiment would lose 32 of its members, including their beloved navigator Yevgenia Rudneva, an astronomy student who used her knowledge of the stars to guide her pilot through the darkest nights. She was shot down and killed at the age of 23. The Germans, initially dismissive, had grown to fear and respect their female adversaries, so much so that any Luftwaffe pilot who managed to shoot down one of the flimsy Po-2s was automatically awarded the prestigious Iron Cross. This turned every mission into a high-stakes hunt, with the Night Witches as the prized quarry. But the losses did not break them. They enraged them. Each empty bunk was not just a source of sorrow, but a well of cold, hard fury. They became fiercer, more daring, more relentless. They would paint extra red stars on the noses of their planes, one for each confirmed kill, but the unpainted stars, the ones they carried in their hearts for their fallen sisters, were the ones that truly fueled them. They would fly the missions of the dead, taking on extra sorties to ensure the regiment's nightly tally of destruction never wavered. They were fighting for the motherland, yes, but they were also fighting for each other, for the ghosts who flew beside them in the open cockpits. Grief, for the 588th, was not a reason to stop. It was a reason to fly faster. The war ground on, a meat grinder chewing up land and lives. The women of the 588th, now officially designated the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment for their exceptional service, flew through it all. They fought over the scorched earth of the North Caucasus, the swamps of the Taman Peninsula, and the blood-soaked fields of Belarus. They were no longer an experiment. They were legends, their reputation whispered with a mixture of awe and terror on both sides of the front. They crossed into Poland, then into Germany itself. The landscape changed, but the mission did not. Every night they would climb into their patched-up biplanes and deliver their small, precise packages of vengeance. By April 1945, they were flying missions over the smoldering ruins of Berlin. The war was in its death throes. From their open cockpits, they could see the fires consuming the heart of the Third Reich, a hellscape that marked the end of a long and brutal journey. You can almost imagine the surreal feeling, flying their simple, almost primitive aircraft over the capital of the enemy who had dismissed them, mocked them, and awarded medals for their deaths. They had outlasted the mockery. They had outlasted thousands of German soldiers. They had outlasted the war itself. Their final mission was flown on May 8, 1945, just outside Berlin. When the news of the official German surrender came, there was no wild celebration, but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, and then a wave of overwhelming relief. They had done it. They had survived. The numbers they left in their wake are staggering. Over 3 years of relentless combat, the all-female regiment flew more than 24,000 sorties. They dropped 23,000 tons of bombs. They were credited with destroying 17 river crossings, 46 ammunition depots, 86 enemy firing points, and 12 fuel depots. Their flimsy planes, which were never supposed to survive, had been in the air for a combined total of 28,676 hours. 23 of their pilots and navigators were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor for valor. Their commander, Yevdokia Bershanskaya, became the only woman to ever receive the Order of Suvorov. When the war ended, they returned home not to parades, but to a society that didn't quite know what to do with its female heroes. They were expected to trade their flight jackets for aprons, to forget the roar of the engine and the thrill of the hunt. Many of them found the silence of civilian life deafening. Their incredible story was largely unknown in the West for decades, a footnote in a conflict dominated by the stories of men. But legends have a way of surviving. The story of the Nachthexen was kept alive by the women themselves, at quiet reunions where they would remember the faces and the laughter of the sisters they had lost. Today, the sound of the Po-2 engine is a rarity, a museum piece. But the legacy of the women who flew it is not silent. It is an echo in the wind, a testament to the fact that courage has no gender. They were students, teachers, and dreamers who became phantoms in the night. They took an obsolete crop duster made of wood and fabric and turned it into a weapon of psychological terror. They were the witches of the night, and they proved that even the quietest sound, a simple, whispering whoosh in the darkness, can be the most terrifying sound of all. Thank you for watching.